Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Is this one work? Oh, I have two. This is amazing. Well done for making it after lunch back to the conference, because it would have been so much easier to stay outside and enjoy the sun. No? It's too hot. That's what we asked for. We asked for too hot weather, because then it feels much better inside. And I'm sure you're not going to regret. So I'm here today just to say two words, a couple of words, well, a bit more than two, to introduce our very, very special speaker, Péter Medyes. It means sour cherry. So if you want, you can call him Peter Sour Cherry. It's probably easier than Medyes. He's a very special person. He's a very special person for many reasons. Because he has a very long career in education. He is a professor of applied linguistics and language pedagogy. He was the vice president of IATEFL, deputy state secretary and ambassador of Hungary. Everything oh my God, this moves, it's amazing. Everything very impressive, and he has a lot of knowledge to share. But if you've been to our previous talks, and you know that Cambridge Assessment English and Cambridge University Press, we have the Cambridge Experience today, and we had Simon previously, and he's been talking a lot about emotions, and then also Andrea and Alex had a very interesting talk about influences. And you know that we influence people and we teach people not because we have all this knowledge, but because we connect with them. There's an huge emotional side. And that's what strikes me about Peter. He's the kind of person that you meet once and he immediately makes you feel so good about yourself that you just want to learn from him. You're like, yes, please tell me things. I'm sure you have lots of things to tell. And he does. And he does it in such a nice way and with a bit of humor. He's Hungarian. So if you've been to Hungary, or if you're familiar with Hungarians, you know they have a very special humor. And he's my second favorite Hungarian in the world. Sorry, Peter. Because my boyfriend is Hungarian, so he's the first one, okay? Lots of people are coming. Come on, so everyone can see Peter. I want an applause for Peter while he's coming up to the stage. And thank you very much for being here. Thank you.
And the slides. Thank you. Oops.
Where is your PowerPoint?
Yeah.
That one?
Slides. Yes, the last one.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you so much. It's not up yet. Technical glitches. That can happen. In the meantime, what shall I tell you? Until we have the first slide, how are you doing? Yeah, that's a very, very clever question. I'm doing fine. Yes. Yes.
It's the first time you're in Portugal.
Oh, yes, it's the first time. It's the first time that I've been presenting here in Portugal. I'm about to present, but wait, let's wait for the others to come inside. Yeah, I'm not, what shall I say until I have the first slide? Okay, I'll start. No, I won't start until I have the first slide, because that's terribly important. So I'm only the second Hungarian who you like. Your second favorite. Okay, that's not too bad. I've got the silver medal. Yes. Yeah, that's okay. Yes.
aparece aí ou não?
Not to worry.
Uau!
Thank you. You saved my talk. Thank you so much. So the title of my presentation is Who's Better, Natives or Non-Natives? And of course it's the non-natives who are much better, needless to say. But I'd like to prove this. And let me start by saying that more than 20 years ago, I had a paper published in the ELT journal, followed by a full-length book. As I was working on the two pieces, I had the gut feeling that I was going to open a can of worms. How disgusting. After lunch. However, not in my wildest dream did I imagine that there were going to be so many worms in that can. In those two studies, I investigated the differences between native and non-native speaking teachers of English, for whom I used the acronyms NEST and non-NEST. Differences? But aren't we all equal? I hear you ask. I haven't actually, but you could have asked me that. Of course, there are far more similarities than differences between the two groups. Some of those similarities are fairly visible too. Both nests and non-nests have 2 ears, 2 eyes, one nose. We were born 30, 50, 100 years ago. Many of us are married with children. And sadly, all of us will die someday. This is the Hungarian speaking from. In addition, we have the same ideas, problems, and dreams. We often have similar teaching qualifications, length of experience, and technical repertoire too. Why highlight the differences then, you may ask? Because there are differences, and quite a few of them too. For good or ill, we fall into 2 distinct groups, nest and non-nest. So, the aims of my lecture then are to compare nests and non-nests, pinpoint the differences, focus on non-nests. After all, we are in majority in this room. Non-nests, put up your hands, please. Wow. Any nest? Any nest? Get out. No. Stay. In addition to this, I will touch upon our disadvantages, that is, non-nest disadvantages, but dwell much longer on the advantages that we enjoy over nest. However, my primary goal is, for the next hour or so, to give your self-confidence a boost. I want you, dear non-nest, to take pride in what you are. Non-native teachers of English. And in order to clarify what I mean, I advance 2 sets of hypotheses. Let's take a look at the first set. So set number 1. My first assumption is that nests and non-nests differ in terms of their language proficiency. And this has the implication that nests are more proficient users of English than non-nest. That's why I'm reading out my lecture, because I don't have the self-confidence. You know, I'm not Simon or Steve. This is pretty obvious, since they are native speakers of English, which we are not. And let me justify this statement with reference to my own English language competence. And to save time, I'll identify only two of my weak spots, namely listening skills and speaking skills. So first, listening. I don't understand the jokes of English stand-up comedians. I've tried several times in vain. Why? Because comedians say the punchline fast and under the breath. By the time I figure out the joke, the comedian is 10 sentences ahead of me. I wish he'd slow down and repeat the punchline. Like this, for example. Now I'm telling you a Hungarian joke. Two friends are talking. Have you heard the latest Hungarian joke? And then I say, careful, I come from Hungary. And then my English friend says, that's all right, I shall tell it slowly. Self-deprecation. Recently, I watched the American series running under the title Breaking Bad. Anybody seen this, Netflix? Yeah, Breaking Bad. I couldn't understand a word of it. So after the first part, I decided to watch it with English subtitles. They didn't have the Hungarian subtitles. That's why I had the English ones, because I wanted to enjoy the film. Okay, that's as far as my listening goes, and now speaking. With due modesty, I claim to be a fairly fluent speaker of English, even though I speak English with a Hunglish accent, that is, Hungarian English accent. I'm more fluent than most non-natives. However, not half as fluent as any native speaker of English. When my son was born, my friends often said, you are an English teacher. Your wife is an English teacher too. How lucky your son is. He learned English from the cradle. And then what I said was nonsense. We kept talking to him in Hungarian. Why? Mainly because we don't know baby speak in English. I can't say, which I can do in Hungarian. And the reason is, both my parents were Hungarian, and I was 27 years old when I first visited an English-speaking country. For me, speaking English is like wearing an uncomfortable costume. Too tight. Here is my son, by the way. No, it's not my son, but anyway. So it's too tight, 100% polyester. It's all sham and artificial. If scratched beneath the surface, my utterances are hollow, unsuitable for carrying personal messages, well-practiced hollow phrases tied together with a string. It's not only that I'm less fluent than native speakers, but I'm less accurate, less appropriate, and less colorful too. Worse still, I'm unable to express my emotions in English. I can't give vent to my anger, for example. Let me illustrate what I mean with an anecdote. A few years ago, I'm getting very angry now. A few years, you will see why. You will see why in a second. A few years ago, I went to a shop in London to buy a shirt. The shop assistant asked a young guy, "What size?" "I don't know exactly," I stammered. And then he said, "Men of your age should know what size they are," and turned his back on me. Gobsmacked, my subtle English language competence evaporated without a trace. In Hungarian, I would have known what to say. Nobody can understand Hungarian, I hope, because it was, yeah, or something similar. Let's face it, in English, I'm a boring person. Maybe in Hungarian too, but that's another matter. And this applies to you all guys. Non-native speakers are dumb, and we non-native speakers of English, that is non-nest, are the worst off. No offense meant. In order to prove that this is more than the whimper of a pathetic non-nest, I collected questionnaire, as everybody would, a researcher should, and interview data from several hundred teachers, 325 to be precise, a mixed bag of nest and non-nest. And lo and behold, the overwhelming majority shared my qualms and queries. This being the case, non-nest had better accept with resignation that our English language competence is not on a par with any of our native peers. Therefore, if native speakers tell you that your English is as good as theirs, don't believe a word of what they are saying. They are either lying or acting politically correctly or comparing you to an uneducated native speaker, such as an English football hooligan. Now, I know what I've said so far is not very uplifting. Instead of succumbing to despair, however, remember that every cloud has a silver lining. I just looked it up in a dictionary. I knew it in Hungarian, I translated it, and now I'm sharing it with you. Please put down this if you didn't know this. So, every cloud has a silver lining. Now, time to examine my second assumption, which is nest and non-nest differ in terms of their teaching behavior. On the basis of the collated data, I specify these differences in a tabular form. Here it is. You can't see it? Not to worry. Take this pair of binoculars. It will help, I'm sure. Now, these data prove... Enough of the laughter. Be serious. Now, these data seem to prove that indeed nest and non-nest teach differently, believe me. However, the first two hypotheses led me to a third one. And it says, the discrepancy in language proficiency accounts for most of the differences found in the teaching behavior. After all, if nest and non-nest use the language differently, it's logical to assume that they teach it differently too. And I consider this cause and effect relationship so evident that I didn't even bother to seek empirical evidence to confirm it. And fourthly, I claimed that nest and non-nest can be equally good teachers, but each on their own terms. Before I let you know about my respondents' answer, let me now take a straw poll. Here is a tricky one, a quiz. Suppose, just suppose, that you were the principal of a commercial language school here in Portugal. If there were a vacancy for a teaching post, who would you prefer to employ? Only a nest? Preferably a nest? Makes no difference? Can't tell. So, who would go for option A? Only a nest. Put up your hand. No political correctness. Tell me the truth. Nobody. Preferably a nest. Maybe 1/3. Makes no difference. Oh, you are bloody liars, all of you. Or the reason is that you are not the principal of a school, and that's why you are free to say that. And who would say, can't tell? Okay, a few people. Well, the respondents in my survey were rather divided on this issue. While nearly half of them agreed, the other half expressed their preference for either nest or non-nest in roughly equal proportions. But at this point, I couldn't help asking myself, how come that non-nest can be as good as nest despite their linguistic handicap. What gives us, non-nests, a competitive edge? Surely, this is only possible if we have certain attributes that nests are lacking. Okay, but what are these attributes? Now, in order to be able to answer these questions and possibly cheer you up a little bit, I put forward a second set of hypotheses which displays the bright side of being a non-nest. This time, however, I dispensed with empirical research. Instead, I relied upon my personal experience and intuition and picked the brains of some of my fellow teachers. Now, let me briefly elaborate on each of these assumptions. And my first claim is that non-nest, that is us Portuguese teachers, can provide a better learner model. Well, I can speak Portuguese, by the way. I can say obrigado. That's all. After all, just come to think of it, we didn't acquire the English language like our nest colleagues. We learned it at school. We didn't acquire it, we learned it at school. Just like our students, shedding tears of pain in the process. In a sense, nests are inimitable models. We are imitable, if there is such a word in English. But according to the dictionary, only the negative exists. Imitable is not an English word. But from now on, it does exist because I've used it. And I'm a creative user of the English language, a non-nest. Thank you. And I finished. Thank you very much. Oh, that's not the end. That's not the end yet. Just wait and see. So, for non-nest, native speaker proficiency, let's face it, you guys, is a mirage. What we can set as a realistic goal is a high level of non-native speaker proficiency. And at this point you may ask, but is there a correlation between linguistic performance and teaching performance? I know that you have sleepless nights over this, and every night you ask your partner, is there a correlation between linguistic performance and teaching performance? And my tentative answer is yes, but I'm also aware that success is a complex issue. There is more to it than language proficiency. Teaching qualifications, experience, personal traits, motivation, love of children, blah, 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 and a lot of other nonsense. What I'm suggesting is that a good command of English is a necessary, but not a sufficient condition for successful teaching. If language proficiency, come to think of it again, if language proficiency were the only attribute that mattered, nests would be better teachers by definition, which they are not. Now, here is my second assumption. Non-nests can teach language learning strategies more effectively than nests. We, non-nest, were language learners, and still are, successful language learners into the bargain. If we weren't, we wouldn't have become language teachers, would we? We are conscious of which learning strategies have worked for us and which ones have not. We know every nook and cranny. Nook and cranny. Did you know this word? Did you know this? Oh, native speaker. Yeah, okay. Again, it was the dictionary that helped me. And that's why I'm reading out my presentation, otherwise I would only be able to speak in very simple sentences. So we know, again, put this down, we know every nook and cranny of the road that leads to proficiency in English. Nests have never gone down that road, certainly not with respect to learning English. Given this, I claim that we are better at making our students' learning process effective, fast and easy, relatively. Now, my third argument is that non-nest, that is us, we can supply more information about the English language than nest. As I've pointed out, we know less English than our native peers. On the other hand, we know more about English than they do. A lot more. We have amassed huge amounts of information about the English language during our own learning process. For instance, we are aware how difficult it is for a foreigner to use the word enough. To a native speaker, that's not a problem. Enough, what's the point? Huh? Enough, yeah, okay. Here are a few sentences to try and prove my point. My car is big enough. Okay, so enough comes after an adjective. Okay. There are more than enough cars on the roads of Budapest. Okay, enough always comes before a noun. My Mazda isn't a big enough car for our family. So if there is an adjective-noun combination, enough comes after the adjective, but before the noun. There are more than enough big cars on the roads of Budapest. Oops. Enough preceding an adjective-noun compound. What shall I do now? And finally, this should be explanation enough why the mayor of Budapest considers introducing a toll in the city centre. Enough after a noun. I've had enough. I give up. And here is a typical Hungarian example, a typical Hungarian mistake, in fact. Simon, he asked me the other day, actually I never met Simon before, and now the other day, suppose that he asked me this question, Peter, did you know that Brad Pitt was 53 last year? And then I say, wow, she looks much younger. And then Simon, she? But Brad Pitt is a man, surely. Now, in explanation, in Hungarian, there is only one personal pronoun to cover all three genders. Therefore, we constantly confuse he, she, and it. Don't get me wrong. Hungarians may be genderless, but not sexless. And this brings me on to my fourth point. Non-nest can anticipate and prevent difficulties more effectively than nest. Nests can better tell what is right or wrong in English. There's no doubt about this. Non-nest, on the other hand, can better perceive what is easy or difficult. We are equipped with special antennae, a kind of sixth sense, sixth sense. We can predict what's likely to go wrong even before our students open their mouths. Yes, I'm waiting for my student to say the right answer, and I know she's going to make a mistake. Say it, she's made the mistake. And I know everything. So I know what mistakes they're going to make even before they open their mouths. Nests can't. But of course, this is also a big danger and a risk, because we tend to overcorrect, unfortunately. I do too, with my red pen 2 or 3 times. If he writes, he go, then I say, fail. Because this is the only thing that I know, really. You know, grammar. Grammar is so easy to grab. You know, 150 pages, a descriptive grammar book. And once I've swatted it up, I know English grammar, inside out. Whereas when it comes to lexis, that's the real problem. Then I never underline anything because I'm never sure whether it's right or wrong. Imitable. Does it exist? Oh yes, I forget, 5 minutes ago I introduced this. Yeah, it does. And fifthly, don't worry, there's only one more after this. Fifthly, I argue that non-nests show more empathy to the needs and problems of students than nests. Now, this is not to say that non-nests were born to be more empathetic than nests. In the language classroom, however, we can automatically slip into our students' shoes. Why? Because we come from the same linguistic, social, cultural, and educational background as our students. We have a pretty clear picture of what they feel, talk, think, and dream about. We can often understand each other with the wink of an eye. Nests can't, simply because they come from a different culture. And finally, I assume, what's the time? Oh, I've got plenty of time, more than enough. Finally, I assume that non-nests can benefit from the student's native language. For a long time, the monolingual principle was never challenged. The native language was all but expelled from the language classroom. However, it has made a comeback in recent years. This being the case, we have an enormous advantage over nest, provided that the group we are teaching is monolingual. Yes, I remember, by the way, when I started my career, I'm sorry, I'm not reading this out. I'm trying to speak just off the top of my head. That's it, top of my head. I remember when I started my career about 50 years ago. Yeah, 50 years ago. Then it was the audiolingual method. And I remember we were not allowed to say anything in Hungarian in the Hungarian classroom. We were only allowed to say everything in English and explain everything in English. And my students were not even allowed to have a two-language vocabulary book, okay? So they could only write in English. And I remember in one of the first classes I tried to explain to them the meaning of light, okay, or lamp. And I pointed to the lamp on the ceiling. And then I walked around the aisles, and then I realized that my students, almost all of them, wrote ceiling instead of light. And it was at that point that I realized perhaps the Hungarian language can help students understand. But of course, we shouldn't overdo this. Now, let me summarize the overall message of the 6 assumptions I've put forward. What it all boils down to is that our linguistic deficit is a blessing in disguise. It's precisely this deficit that helps us develop capacities that nests cannot even hope to possess. Just, did you hear? Not even hope to possess. Just taking my revenge for all the sweat and tears that I have had to shed. Shed, yes. Shed. Yes. Irregular, yeah. That's how my brain works. It's terrible. You know, I wake up in the middle of the night, you know, and I have this shed. What is the past tense of shed? My life is a misery, really. So, in the final analysis, nests and non-nests may turn out to be equally good teachers because their respective strengths and weaknesses balance each other out, since each group can offer competencies of which the other group is in short supply. The ideal school is one. Which one? The ideal school is one in which there is a good mix of nests and non-nests who work in close collaboration with each other. I'll come back to this towards the end of my talk. Bear with me. Another good phrase, bear with me. Now, at the beginning of my lecture, and here comes the critique, Oh, yeah, you see? We balance each other out. I nearly forgot to show you this. You would have missed a lot if I hadn't. So I refer to the can of worms. I'm not going to show you the can of worms again. And indeed, after the first publication of my books and papers on the nest, non-nest issue, I was fiercely attacked from all quarters. I could barely survive. Linguists, for example, rejected the division of natives and non-natives. Can anyone define who is a native or a non-native? They asked. And their answer was a resounding no. A vehement opponent of the native-non-native speaker separation, Péter, a Canadian, went so far as to lend his book the title, "The Native Speaker is Dead." I'm not kidding, that was the title of his book. But luckily you are still alive, so don't worry. Although I readily admit that the native-non-native dichotomy doesn't stand up to close scrutiny, the majority of us still fall into either this or that category. I would query, for instance, that I'm a non-native speaker of English, whereas that guy over there, Simon, is a native speaker. Mind you, there are lots of other things in the universe which defy clear-cut definitions. The philosopher Karl Popper said, for example, that if physicists in the 19th century had been bogged down in the definitional problems of the phenomenon light, the electric bulb might never have been invented. As if to close the polemic, the famous linguist Halliday quipped that the native speaker is a useful term precisely because it cannot be closely defined. But it was not only the linguists who hated me. Yeah, you see, I'm giving vent to my anger now in English. Up rose the stalwarts of the PC movement too. They objected to the prefix non in the term non-native, stressing that it had a pejorative ring to it. No human being is inferior to another. We are all equal, they queried. But who said we aren't equal? Different doesn't imply better or worse. Different simply means different, with no value judgment attached to it. All different, all equal. Another band of critics consisted of teacher educators and their ilk. They complained that while I scourged non-ness for their linguistic shortcomings, I gave short shrift to other attributes, such as teaching qualifications, lacks of experience, individual traits, level of motivation, love of children, and many more. Let me make it clear. I set high store by these other attributes. I pay them little tribute merely for research purposes. The validity of a statement, now the research is speaking, the validity of a statement can be proven only if all variables are kept constant, except for one variable, which is, by the way, the English wouldn't show this. This is not one, this is one. Yeah. I learned it, by the way, at the age of 23. All I claimed was that all other things being equal, the better a non-ness speaks English, the better teacher he or she is likely to be. However, my most vociferous opponents were non-native advocacy groups. They fumed that the separation of the two groups fueled discriminatory practices against non-nest. And they were right too. It's a sorry fact that teaching applications from even highly qualified and experienced non-nest often get turned down in favor of nest with no comparable credentials. However, I doubt that this is an overriding concern in most parts of the world. The percentage of non-nest in search of a teaching job in English-speaking countries is relatively low, isn't it? Non-nest typically work in EFL environments at home and not in ESL environment abroad. Anyway, forcibly removing the label non-nest is no more than window dressing. like it or not, ladies and gentlemen, nest and non-nest are different species of animals. Now, all right, I would like to ask you another question, all right? And I skip here a little bit, yeah? Yeah? Yeah, okay, here it is. Suppose that you are still the principal of that school. What would you tell your new non-nest colleague to do when meeting first group? Pretend to be a native speaker of English, reveal your non-native identity, do as you please. Before I ask you this question, let me tell you another anecdote. I was a Fulbright teacher in Los Angeles many, many years ago. And I had my Professor Kaplan, and I was supposed to teach Hungarian language, Hungarian literature, Hungarian culture, Hungarian history, Hungarian everything. So I had prepared extremely conscientiously at home, waiting for the wonderful time for me to teach Hungarian in the American context. And when I arrived, I introduced myself to Professor Kaplan, and I said, Professor, here I am to teach Hungarian language, literature, culture, and everything. And he looked at me and said, Peter, here nobody is interested in Hungarian. You understand? And then I said, but Professor, what can I do then? He said, teach them English. You know, there's a group of Asians, you know, they are all training to become engineers. Teach that English is not very good. Teach them English language. And then I said, but Professor Kaplan, I'm a non-native speaker, teacher of English, let alone American English. And he said, nobody will notice it. By the way, at that time, my listening comprehension was even worse than it is today, especially when it came to American English. I remember about a fortnight, 2 weeks, fortnight. Yeah. About 2 weeks after I'd introduced myself to Professor Kaplan, he came up to me and said, Peter, just call me Bob. And I said, I'm sorry, Professor. And he said, Peter, just call me Bob. I said, I'm sorry, I still don't understand. He looked at me and said, you, Peter, me, Bob. Is that clear? This was a lesson to learn, let me tell you. But then I still had to go into the classroom, and there was my group of Asian students, lovely people, and I decided to make a clean breast of it. And I said, I'm Peter, I come from Hungary, and I'm going to teach you English. And they all looked at me like this. Is that why we paid so much money and be taught by a Hungarian? They didn't even know where Hungary was. But after a while, you know, they began to like me, and they looked at me as a kind of model, because I was a Hungarian, still being able to speak relatively fluently. And, you know, I set them as a model, you know. If this guy, this small Hungarian, was able to learn English so well, then we might stand a chance as well. And after a while, we really got rather close to each other, so much so that after about 2 or 3 months, one of the Japanese youngsters came up to me and said, Peter, may I talk to you in private? And I said, yeah, what is it? And he said, I've got a big problem. What is it? Yesterday, I kissed an American girl on the lips. And I said, well, big deal. And he said, do you think I might have got AIDS? I said, don't worry about that. So, going back to this, what would you tell your new non-nest colleague to do? After I've told you these anecdotes, it will be very easy to lie. So pretend to be a native speaker of English. Who would say that? Overwhelming majority, thank you. Who would say that you should reveal your non-native identity? Hands up. Yeah, I'm Hungarian, I'm Portuguese. And who would say, do as you please? Ah, quite a few people. Yeah, okay. And now, again, I make, yeah, Paradise Lost. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not going to show you the bright side. Yeah. So, the conclusion. What should we do now? I think there is a new paradigm looming large. And I think that we should reconsider and fundamentally rethink some of the steps that we should take in language policy and practice. Teacher trainers, in particular, bear an increased responsibility for preparing prospective teachers how to adapt to the rapid transformation of education. And it is with these caveats in mind that I propose a 9-point action plan. It's not a big discovery. Oops. Paradise Lost, huh? Yeah. Oh, by the way, 97% of the ELT profession consists of non-nest. This is fantastic. I'm so proud of it. Although I was just born like that, so I can't really. If only I had been born a native speaker of English. No. Okay, so here is an action plan consisting of 9 steps. And the first step is an adequate teacher supply to satisfy the exponential growth of demand for English should be ensured. I think this stands to reason. Secondly, work on establishing norms of English as a lingua franca use should be intensified. 3, more heed should be paid to the special needs of young learners. And here I have to stop for 1 second. Believe it or not, you know, everything is going down now. There are more kindergarten children who would begin to learn English, and I'm sure that in Portugal as well. So the age limit is going down. 4th, the scope for content and language integrated learning in schools should be broadened. 5th, information and communication technology should be factored into the curriculum of teacher education, except for me, because I haven't got a clue about that. I'm not one of the Z generation. 6, the integration of classroom and out-of-school learning opportunities should be reinforced. 7th, language improvement courses for non-nest should constitute a fundamental component of teacher education curricula. 8th, nest job applicants prepare to stay for an extended period of time, not just for jetting in and jetting out. Nest applicants who are willing to stay for an extended period of time in the foreign country should be prioritized. And finally, enhanced opportunities of non-nest cooperation should be created. And now, here come my 2 little things. Prepared by some of my students. This is the man, this is me. This is whoever it is. The pub. Yes.
Beautiful words, Peter. You've nearly made me cry. However, you haven't answered the crucial question. Who's worth more, the nest or the non-nest?
Come on, this is an absurd question.
Okay, let me put it this way. Who is the ideal nest and who is the ideal non-nest?
Well, the ideal teacher is one who is well qualified and experienced.
Don't waffle, Peter. These are the similarities. What are the distinguishing features?
Okay then. The ideal nest is a professional who speaks the local language and is familiar with the local culture. In this regard, Sylvia Richardson said in her plenary at a recent APPI Conference, quote, "Beware, there are two disadvantages in global arrangements. One is not knowing English. Two is knowing only English." And who is the ideal non-nest? The ideal non-nest is one whose command of English is at near native level. Let's not delude ourselves. A high level of language proficiency remains a make or break requirement. You said that the good nest should be familiar with the local culture. How about the good non-nest? He should be well versed in the culture, or rather cultures in the plural, of English-speaking countries.
Britain, USA, Australia,
And the whole world. Don't forget that English has become the universal lingua franca. The ideal teacher is multilingual and multicultural. In this sense, too, the ideal teacher, the ideal nest, and the ideal non-nest stand quite close to each other, even though they arrive from different directions.
do we need both species?
Which one is correct? Both. Looked it up in the dictionary again.
Do we need both species then?
By all means, nest and non-nest serve equally useful purposes, but each in their own ways. Let's not blur these differences.
Time for a punchline, Peter.
Okay, in an ideal school, there should be a good mix of nests and non-nests who complement each other with their strengths and weaknesses. Each group should contribute with competencies of which the other group is in short supply.
Sitting in opposite trenches?
Oh no, nests and non-nests must collaborate as closely as possible. At the end of the day, we are all friends.